they've installed nearly 20,000 smoke alarms in First Nations, and there we're seeing the death rates are phenomenally lower.
Tonight, a new report on fire-related deaths involving Indigenous peoples produces unsurprising results.
When we talk about Indigenous identity, we're not just talking about the DNA that is in your blood, because blood quantum is traditionally a colonial concept to address somebody's Indigenous identity.
Our Truth and Politics panel is here to discuss the thorny issue of identity.
Thinking about the connections that we made with the youth, it's something that I really hold near and dear to my heart.
And a new documentary looks at a legendary wrestling tour and the impacts on the communities and wrestlers. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The Supreme Court of Canada dismissed an appeal this morning by the man convicted of manslaughter in the 2011 death of a Cree Métis woman. This is on the heels of an appeal being dismissed by Alberta's highest court back in January. The legal proceedings for 36-year-old Cindy Gladue's death have been ongoing for more than a decade. The mother of three bled to death in a motel bathtub in Edmonton after a sex act with Bradley Barton. He testified the sex was consensual and was originally found not guilty of first-degree murder by a jury in 2015. The verdict and details of the trial sparked public outrage. Barton was convicted of a lesser offense of manslaughter at a second trial in 2021 and sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison. Barton claims that he was denied procedural fairness in that trial. An assistant superintendent of the Beaufort Delta Education Council in Inuvik has been charged with multiple sexual offenses. On August 5th, 44-year-old Richard Stephen McKinnon of Inuvik was charged with 2 counts of sexual assault, sexual interference, 2 counts of sexual exploitation, invitation to sexual touching, making sexually explicit material available to a child, assault, and breach of trust. The offenses are alleged to have happened in Inuvik and Alakuktuk between 2018 and 2020. Inuvik RCMP say because of McKinnon's position, there may be additional victims, and they are encouraged to contact RCMP or Crime Stoppers. McKinnon has been released with conditions, and his next court appearance will be on September 24th in Inuvik. A new report is out today that focuses on the circumstances surrounding fire-related deaths among Indigenous peoples from 2011 to 2020. The report released by Statistics Canada was prepared for and sponsored by the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council. According to researcher Len Garris of the Indigenous Fire Safety Council, the findings were not surprising. Fire-related mortality rates were found to be significantly higher among First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Garris found poor housing and crowded homes continue to be a factor. Among Inuit, the mortality rate was 17 times higher. Garris says a quick way to save lives is adding smoke detectors.
I know in British Columbia is the opposite of all the other provinces in terms of the ratio of fire deaths associated to the population. So what I know happened in British Columbia is in 2012, they started an aggressive smoke alarm campaign. And between 2012 and today, they've installed nearly 20,000 smoke alarms in First Nations communities in British Columbia. And there we're seeing the death rates are phenomenally lower.
2 new faces have been elected to the First Nations Lands Advisory Board. It's a national board dedicated in supporting First Nations to reestablish control and jurisdiction over their territories, natural resources, and environment. Following this week's election of 7 directors, 5 of those seats were re-elected to the board. But new faces are Councillor Howard E. Grant of the Musqueam Indian Band in BC and Chief Gordon Bluesky of the Broken Head Ojibwe Nation in Manitoba. Blue Sky has extensive knowledge in First Nations land and has been chief of Broken Head Ojibwe Nation for more than 2 years. He was just recently re-elected by acclamation for a new 4-year term. Grant is a longtime counselor of Musqueam Indian Band and historian. He has done extensive work with the federal government. Both Blue Sky and Grant will begin their 3-year term with the board after its AGM in late August. The International Joint Commission has its first Indigenous woman serving as a commissioner. Dr. Susan Chiblow is from the Northern Ontario community of Garden River First Nation and is an assistant professor at the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of Guelph. Mike McDonald has more.
The International Joint Commission deals with issues affecting waterways along the Canada-U.S. border, including the approval of projects affecting water levels and flows across the border, and investigating issues and recommending solutions. Its newest commissioner, Dr. Susan Chiblow, has been working with First Nation communities for more than 30 years and has an extensive background in environmental science.
I have also done my PhD with a focus on Inuvik Kendaswin Min, which is our water knowledge, Inuvik water knowledge. And I've always had a relationship, I suppose I can say, with water, and always as an Anishinaabe woman and learning about my responsibilities. And one of those are to protect the water.
Chiblow grew up in Garden River, a community east of Sault Ste. Marie, located on the banks of the St. Mary's River, which connects Lake Superior and Lake Huron. She says her culture continues to play a significant role in her professional life.
My understanding from the teachings that I've received by numerous Anishinaabe women is that we have that role to protect the water because only women can carry that water lodge. And so the women's voices need to be at the table. And in the past, there were no women in water decision making, not even non-Indigenous women.
Chiblow says it's important for Indigenous voices to be heard.
I've always been told that we need to be everywhere. And when we are everywhere, then we are recognized, then our knowledge is recognized and our voices are heard. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be in this position.
Chiblow was once the environmental coordinator for the Chiefs of Ontario. She continues to work with First Nation communities and elders as an Anishinaabe advisor on environmental projects and policy analysis. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Sault Ste. Marie.
Thanks, Mike. To the wildfire situation now, and a growing wildfire in British Columbia has prompted more evacuations. A new emergency reception center is set up in the Shuswap after a fire in the North Okanagan forced people from their homes. The Hulkar Mountain wildfire burning northwest of Armstrong was first discovered Sunday night and has now grown to 670 hectares. It is believed to have been caused by lightning. Meantime, the lower Blue Mountain wildfire burning near Penticton is now considered under control. An evacuation order has been downgraded to an alert, and residents who were affected are now allowed to return home. It's Thursday, and that means our Truth and Politics panel is here. Jennifer Lewitz and Negon Sinclair will join us after the break. Welcome back. High-profile cases of so-called pretendianism have made major headlines in recent years. But in the case of lawyer Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, a DNA test has cast doubt on allegations she had no Indigenous heritage. For more on this, our Truth and Politics panel is here. Jennifer Leywitz is a partner with Pasqua Harbor Strategies, and Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Negon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, this recently came about in an agreed statement of facts with Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond and the Law Society of BC that the DNA test that she took found she had substantial Indigenous DNA. Should that have pretty much been the end of this?
I think that's a really interesting question to ask, because there's been a lot of conversation about where she belongs. And when we talk about Indigenous identity, we're not just talking about the DNA that is in your blood, because blood quantum is traditionally a colonial concept to address somebody's Indigenous identity, but your sense of belonging. And, you know, I think that there's been a lot of questions around her because of how publicly known she is. And I think that if you're going to reach that point where, you know, your identity is help boosting you or put you on those national scales, so you're so well known and you're advancing your career to the point it is, there is going to be a lot of questions, more so about the belonging over your blood quantum.
Negon, Turpel-Lafond's husband's nation also claims her, but you recently wrote a column on this and wrote, while some may see Turpel-Lafond as Indigenous, many others, like yourself, do not.
You know, sovereignty is an important concept here, because yes, Muskeg Lake, her husband's community, may claim her and may evoke whatever notions of kinship that they wish, whether that includes DNA or not. But the fact is that not all of us have to agree on that, have to agree particularly on what their concept of membership includes. And that's also a part of sovereignty, by Indigenous nations evoking different understandings about what membership includes. And in the case of Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, she certainly has shown that she is willing to, at times, make up or certainly exaggerate elements of her community, where she grew up, and then particularly communities like Norway House Cree Nation in Manitoba, claiming very deep ties with that place, in which that community has not either heard of her or is not claiming her. And if Indigenous identity is not about who you claim, but who claims you, she certainly doesn't fulfill the criteria. And so under that criteria, I would say that under my understanding of indigeneity, particularly around kinship, the things that Jennifer's talking about, Indigenous identity as not being fulfilled in this particular case. And I think what I wrote about in my column is that therefore, for the rest of us who are impacted by someone like this, for instance, being on a hiring committee or making influential choices for the rest of us, I think we have a right to ask those questions and also make determinations on her identity.
Jennifer, you know, as Negon says, this is different for every nation, but how, I guess, can nations address membership when these questions arise?
We can go back to prior to the Indian Act and bring back membership codes, especially now from the amendments to the Indian Act that we have the ability to do that. But there are a lot of questions that have to be answered on how we approach that now, because it's difficult to go back to our traditional ways of knowing and our traditional ways of governing our nations when there has been government influenced policy that has affected the way that happens. And what I mean by that is when you have the residential school system and then the child welfare system and 60 Scoop, that is going to inevitably have lasting impacts. So now, not only can we bring back membership codes and how we govern our members on our nations, but we need to be talking about what that looks like for our lost relatives that are disconnected now to community, and how we make a conscious effort to bring them back. Because there are going to be, you know, First Nations people across the country that are products of the child welfare system that have never lived on community, but do deserve to belong to their community and be claimed by their community and have that connection back to their culture, you know, through language and ceremony. But how do we properly balance both? And we're going to have these tough conversations, and, you know, we're going to be leveraging it with people that, you know, call themselves pretendian hunters, but may at the end of the day be doing more harm than good and undermining another nation's sovereignty while they try to navigate that. So I think that's a really important part that we need to be remembering, is that you know, just because somebody looks a certain way or talks a certain way or grew up in a certain place does not negate the fact that they have every right to belong to their community. And the more we talk about addictions and mental health and, you know, the root cause of crime, we need to be allowing people to connect to community, because that plays a huge role in the rehabilitation of their life.
And Nigan, do you anticipate we'll see more of these high-profile cases, though?
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to identify that the very specific nuance that Jennifer's speaking about, which is that term pretendian, which Drew LaFond has pointed out in elsewhere, that is a very problematic term. It often labels and confuses the issue of sovereignty and the ways in which different communities recognize their members differently. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of what Indigenous nationhood evokes and involves. It's just that the rest of us have to negotiate and figure that out, including Canadians. The problem is Canadians are generally not able, quite unprepared on dealing with this issue around the nuance of Indigenous identity. And unfortunately, it is Canadian institutions that are often involving Indigenous peoples on very high profile, high paying, very influential positions that then impact the rest of us. And so we really have to be able to educate Canadians on these specific nuances that involve membership in different communities, and have them understand that not all communities are the same. And certainly Blood Quantum will never fulfill the criteria within universities. And that's why universities is an example, or just jobs or any other institutions. And so therefore, they really have to work with local Indigenous nations to be able to help rebuild those governments and then evoke those membership codes, as Jennifer talked about.
Jennifer, Nigan, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks to you both.
Thank you.
And for more from the Truth in Politics panel, you can head over to our APTN News YouTube page, where all of the past panels are there for you to watch. Time for one last quick break. Still to come, we'll hear from some of those involved in a new documentary about the Death Tour.
It's about underdogs overcoming impossible odds, and I think that's why Indigenous people really connect with wrestling, specifically professional wrestling, because we have also been underdogs who have persevered over insurmountable odds.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And today is Miracle Treat Day. And with every blizzard purchased in Manitoba, all net proceeds will go towards the Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba. The APTN newsroom enjoyed some of that refreshing treat. For the chance to be our next photo of the day, you can send your photos to share@aptn.ca. A good thing they enjoyed those blizzards yesterday because it was beginning to feel like fall out there today in Winnipeg. Let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 23 in Charlottetown, showers, and 20 in Halifax. 20 in Kuujjuaq and Nain, 22 in Cartwright. Showers and 25 in Montreal, 18 with rain in Chibougamau. 23 and rain in Sault Ste. Marie, showers and 25 in North Bay. 16 and rain in Thunder Bay, showers and 15 in Sioux Lookout. 20 in God's Lake, 24 in Puckatawagan. 19 for Winnipeg, Brandon and Dauphin. 22 in Regina, 23 in Saskatoon. 27 in Uranium City and Stony Rapids. Sunny across northern Alberta, 28 in High Level and Fort Chipewyan. 24 under the sun in Edmonton, 22 in Lethbridge. 25 in Vancouver, 32 for Kamloops. 29 in Prince George, showers, and 31 in Smithers. 19 with rain in Old Crow, showers, and 24 in Whitehorse. Sunny and 24 in Yellowknife, 36 in Norman Wells, 17 in Sax Harbor, smoky, and 29 in Pawlatuck. 28 under the sun in Baker Lake, 23 in Arviat. 10 in Resolute, smoky, and 24 in Joe Haven. For over 30 years, a wrestling promotion called the Death Tour has brought pro wrestling to remote First Nations across northern Manitoba. Now a documentary is shining a spotlight on the tour and the communities it impacts. Here's reporter Sierra Bettens with more.
Growing up in the Mississippiwistic Cree Nation in Manitoba, filmmaker Sonia Ballantyne remembers the excitement she felt when a wrestling tour came to her community.
When I was a little girl, I encountered the Death Tour on one of its summer tours. So when I was about 5 or 6, I met the wrestler Adam Copeland, who wrestles as Edge. And I remember being so terrified of him because I had never really met that many white folks. And so like having this 6-foot-tall white guy with like big blue eyes, I was like, oh my God, no. And so it was really cool because it was the first time I had ever met like a wrestler and wrestling.
Decades later, Ballantyne's first feature-length film is a documentary on the same tour that got her hooked. Co-directed by Ballantyne and Stefan Peterson, the Death Tour follows 4 wrestlers braving ice roads and isolation on the 2-week tour across remote Indigenous communities. Wrestling promoter Tony Condello founded the Death Tour in the 1980s. Chris Jericho, the film's executive producer, is among the many wrestling legends who got their start on the tour.
A lot of the issues we talk about in the film specifically look at like how the communities live and how Tony's tour is often the only non-community organized event that comes up there.
Sage Morin is a wrestler from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation and Alberta. Morin turned to the sport on her healing journey after her 2-year-old son Gio was tragically killed by a drunk driver in 2013. In the ring, she goes by the matriarch.
I wanted to have a lot of kids, and I ended up being a wrestler instead. And as Indigenous people, the strongest in our societies is without a doubt the matriarch. And I right away knew that I wanted to emulate, not just be a wrestler who was Indigenous, but I wanted to be an Indigenous wrestler and have my identity right there at the forefront.
Growing up in the Northwest Territories, Des Lorraine, aka the Eskimo-fo, dreamed of being a wrestler, but never expected to go pro. In 2019, he founded Totally Arctic Wrestling to bring the sport to the north.
So we were really remote. Wrestling had only come to our community one time, and it was fly in, and so it wasn't going to come back. So we kind of figured we would have to teach ourselves. So, I told people that I wanted to start it up, and they sent us a boxing ring, and it was hard to learn in that, but that's what we learned to wrestle in.
Outside the Death Tour ring, the wrestlers act as role models to the students, giving school presentations on topics like bullying, drugs, and mental health. In some cases, the tour arrived in communities dealing with recent youth deaths by suicide. Morn and Lorene say the connections they made with students were priceless.
Thinking about the connections that we made with the youth, it's something that I really hold near and dear to my heart. It makes me emotional, last night when we watched the film in theaters, I was there just crying. I had to go up on stage with my mascara all over my face after.
As the cast and crew gears up for a cross-Canada screening tour, Valentine reflects on the generational legacy the tour has left on Indigenous communities.
Because it's about underdogs overcoming impossible odds. And I think that's why Indigenous people really connect with wrestling, specifically professional wrestling, because we have also been underdogs who have persevered over insurmountable odds.
The Death Tour will premiere in Winnipeg on Friday at the Dave Barber Cinematheque and hits theaters across Canada throughout August. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
That's what I live for.
Looks so good. I've been excited to see this doc for months since Sonia took it to the Cannes Film Festival. Really looking forward to that. Another film making its debut tonight in Winnipeg. Star Wars, A New Hope in Anishinaabe. We'll have more on that tomorrow for you. Be sure to join Creason tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for your first look at the news. And I will be back here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, for news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.